The tinted window of the Rolls-Royce Phantom slid down with a whisper, revealing not the glittering skyline of downtown Houston, but the cracked asphalt of a strip mall parking lot. Inside, Cormac Bellwether didn't see the mundane scenery. He was staring at the reflection in the polished chrome trim of the dashboard, a man who had conquered skylines, whose name was etched onto skyscrapers, but who couldn't bridge the silent 3-foot gap between himself and his own son in the back seat. His 10-year-old boy Noah was a universe of challenges he couldn't acquire, merge, or liquidate. And in 5 minutes, in the cheap glare of a chain restaurant, a young waitress would do something so simple and so profound, it would shatter the gilded cage Cormac had built around his heart. Cormac Bellwether's world was one of calculated pressures and controlled outcomes. As the CEO and founder of Stratton Rhodes Holdings, a private equity firm that treated city blocks like chess pieces, his days were a symphony of numbers, projections, and ruthless efficiency. He could anticipate market fluctuations 3 quarters in advance, and could dissect a hostile takeover bid with the cold precision of a surgeon. His life was a fortress of steel glass and staggering wealth meticulously designed to keep chaos at bay. But chaos lived with him. It resided in the east wing of his sprawling River Oaks mansion, in the form of his son, Noah. Noah was born with a severe form of cerebral palsy, a difficult birth, the doctors had said, a 1 in 1,000 complication that had stolen his wife Catherine and left his son in a body that was a constant betrayal. Noah's mind was a brilliant, blazing fire, full of wit, curiosity, and a deep love for astronomy. He could tell you the composition of nebular clouds and the orbital period of Jupiter's moons, but he couldn't hold a fork steady. He couldn't walk. His legs were thin, uncooperative limbs, and his torso required the constant support of a highly customized, tech-heavy wheelchair that cost more than the average American home. This Sunday was their day. It was a ritual Cormac had instigated after a particularly blunt session with Noah's child psychologist, Dr. Albright. He doesn't need more technology, Mr. Bellwether. He needs his father. So once a week, Cormac would clear his schedule, silence his phone, and take Noah out. It was always an exercise in excruciating awkwardness. They would go to a museum or a quiet park, the silence between them thick with unspoken things, Cormac's grief for his wife, his guilt over his son's condition, and his terrifying inadequacy in the face of Noah's needs. Today, Noah had chosen a place that made Cormac's skin crawl, a mid-tier chain restaurant called the Gilded Spoon. It was loud, garish, and utterly pedestrian. Noah had seen a commercial for their volcano fries and had been uncharacteristically insistent. As Cormac's driver, a stoic man named Peterson, navigated the Rolls-Royce into a parking spot, Cormac felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. Public outings were an ordeal. There were the stares, some sympathetic, some pitying, some morbidly curious. There were the logistical nightmares of navigating a world not built for wheelchairs. Every doorway was a potential obstacle, every crowded room a gauntlet. Peterson came around to assemble the ramp for Noah's chair. Cormac got out, straightening his bespoke Italian suit. He looked at his son, whose head was tilted back, gazing at the uninspiring grey sky. Noah had Catherine's eyes a deep, startling blue that seemed to hold all the secrets of the cosmos he loved so much. Ready Champ Cormac asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. Noah didn't look at him. He just nodded his hand, twitching on the joystick that controlled his chair. Inside the restaurant was a cacophony of clattering dishes, crying children, and a relentlessly cheerful pop song. The hostess, a teenager with glittery eyeshadow, gave them a panicked look when she saw the wheelchair. A table for 2, she stammered. We'll need one with Space. Cormac's jaw tightened. We'll need a booth with a chair removed from the end. It's not complicated. His tone was clipped cold. It was his default setting, the voice he used to terminate multi-million-dollar contracts. The girl flinched and led them to a large booth in the back near the bustling kitchen doors. They sat in silence. Cormac scanned the laminated menu with disgust. Noah was looking around, his eyes wide, taking in the chaos. For a moment, Cormac wondered if his son actually enjoyed this, or if it was just another way to test him, to push him out of his comfort zone. A waitress appeared. She was young, maybe early 20s, with tired eyes, but a smile that seemed genuine. Her name tag read, Rosalie. "Hi there, what can I get for you?" "Folks to start," she asked, her gaze flicking from Cormac to Noah, lingering on Noah for a fraction of a second, with an expression Cormac couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. "I'll have a sparkling water." "He'll have a Coke," Cormac ordered, not looking up from the menu. "Actually," a small voice said, aided by a speech-generating device Noah controlled with a glance, "I'd like a chocolate milkshake. Extra whipped cream." Rosalie's smile widened. "Excellent choice. One cosmic chocolate milkshake coming right up." She looked at Noah directly. "Is it true they put Pop Rocks in the whipped cream?" Noah's lips quirked into a rare, lopsided grin. He typed a quick response. "The commercials are often misleading." Rosalie laughed, a real warm sound that seemed to cut through the restaurant's noise. "I'll make sure it lives up to the hype." She jotted it down and then looked at Cormac. "And for you." Sir Cormac was taken aback. She had engaged his son. Not as a patient, not as a problem, but as a person. It was so unusual that it felt foreign. He cleared his throat. Just the water. As she walked away, he watched Noah, who was tracking her progress to the service station. For the first time all day, the boy's shoulders seemed a little less tense. Cormac felt a strange, unsettling pang in his chest. It was the ghost of an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time, a flicker of hope so faint and fragile, he was terrified it would be extinguished. The meal progressed with the same stilted energy it had begun with. Cormac tried to make conversation, asking Noah about school, about his physical therapy, about a new documentary on black holes. He received short, perfunctory answers. Noah was more interested in watching the controlled chaos of the restaurant, his bright eyes following the waitstaff as they weaved through the tables. Rosalie was a constant warm presence. When she brought Noah's milkshake, she presented it with a flourish. "Behold the galactic shake, complete with a nebula of whipped cream and a constellation of chocolate sprinkles. And I can confirm the Pop Rocks are real." Noah's device chirped, "Mission accomplished." Cormac watched their exchange, a silent observer in his own life. He saw how Rosalie instinctively moved a stray salt shaker out of the path of Noah's unsteady hand, how she spoke to Noah, not to the chair or to Cormac. She treated him with a casual dignity that a parade of expensive specialists and caregivers had always failed to master. They were always so careful, so clinical. Rosalie was just human. They were halfway through their meal when Noah needed to use the restroom. This was always the worst part, the moment of maximum exposure. Dad Noah's device said, the electronic voice, flat and devoid of the anxiety the boy was clearly feeling. "Restroom." Cormac's stomach plummeted. All right. He scanned the restaurant. The men's room was down a narrow, crowded hallway past the bar. It would be a tight squeeze. People would have to move their chairs. They would stare. He could feel the first flush of a cold sweat on his neck. He stood up and began the delicate process of maneuvering the heavy wheelchair out from the table. A man at the next table had to shift his chair, sighing with theatrical impatience. A woman openly stared her fork halfway to her mouth. Cormac's face was a mask of indifference, but inside he was screaming. He hated this. He hated the vulnerability, the public display of their struggle. They reached the hallway. It was even narrower than he'd thought. A service cart was parked against one wall, leaving barely enough room to pass. Cormac pushed the chair forward, his knuckles white. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight. Coming through. People shuffled, but it wasn't enough. The main wheel of Noah's chair caught on the leg of a bar stool. Cormac pushed harder, a grunt of frustration escaping his lips. Noah winced, his body tensing with the jolt. "Just move, please." Cormac snapped at a young man who was slow to pull in his feet. The man glared back. The whole world seemed to shrink to this suffocating corridor of judgment. Suddenly Rosalie was there. She had a tray of drinks balanced on one hand. She took in the scene, in a single glance, the stuck wheelchair, Cormac's red-faced fury, Noah's visible distress, the gawking patrons. "So let me help," she said, her voice calm and even. She set her tray down on the bar. "We're fine." Cormac bit out his pride, stung. "It's okay," she said, ignoring him and crouching down beside Noah's chair. She spoke to him directly, her voice soft. "Hey there, astronaut. Looks like we've hit some asteroid turbulence. Is it okay if I help you navigate?" Noah looked at his father, then back at Rosalie, and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," Cormac said, finally conceding. "If you can just get that cart moved." But Rosalie didn't move the cart. She did something else. Something that broke every rule of service, every protocol of liability, and every boundary of professional conduct. "All right, Noah," she said, her voice full of quiet confidence. "This hallway is a pain. The easiest way through is the fastest. I'm going to lift you. We'll be there in 10 seconds. Is that all right with you?" Cormac's blood ran cold. "What, no?" "Absolutely not. You can't do that. The legal waivers, the insurance implications, the sheer physical risk." His mind reeled. But Noah was already looking at her, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and trust. His device spoke. "Okay." Before Cormac could protest further, Rosalie handed her order pad to a passing busboy. "Hold this, Kevin." Then she turned back to Noah. She expertly unbuckled the chest harness that kept him secure. She positioned herself, bending her knees like a trained professional. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. With a strength that belied her slender frame, she lifted Noah out of his chair. She held him securely, one arm under his legs, the other supporting his back, his head resting safely in the crook of her shoulder. He was so light, so fragile in her arms. The hallway fell silent. The clinking of forks stopped. Every eye was on them. Rosalie walked the few remaining feet down the hall to the large, accessible family restroom. She didn't stumble. She didn't strain. She moved with a purpose and gentleness that was breathtaking. Cormac stood frozen, watching as she disappeared into the restroom with his son. His mind was a maelstrom. Fury warred with a strange sense of awe. She had defied him. She had put his son at risk. She had created a spectacle. But she had also cut through the problem with a single decisive act of compassion. She hadn't seen a liability. She'd seen a little boy who needed help. When she emerged a few moments later, she was carrying Noah just as carefully. She placed him back in his chair, buckled the harness, and gave his shoulder a gentle pat. All clear, mission control. She then turned to Cormac, her expression unreadable. She clearly expected him to be angry. And he was. He was incandescent with a rage born of fear and a complete loss of control. He followed her back to the main dining area, leaving Noah by the hallway entrance. He cornered her near the kitchen doors. "What do you think you were doing?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Rosalie didn't flinch. "Your son needed to use the bathroom, sir. The path was blocked. You had no right to touch him. Do you have any idea of the liability, the risk involved? You could have dropped him. You could have injured him." "I'm a certified nursing assistant," she said calmly, her chin up. "I'm in my 3rd year of nursing school at the University of Houston. I've been trained in patient handling and transfer. I promise you, your son was safer with me than he was with you, trying to force his chair through that hallway." Her words hit him like a physical blow. The truth of them was scalding. But his pride, his fear, his ingrained need for control wouldn't let him back down. He saw the restaurant manager, a harried-looking man named Mr. Henderson, approaching. Cormac straightened his tie, his face like stone. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice carrying now. "Your employee put my child in a dangerous situation without my consent. I want her fired. Immediately." Mr. Henderson's face went pale. Rosalie stared at Cormac, her calm demeanor finally cracking. Her eyes glistened with disbelief and hurt. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him, and in her gaze, Cormac saw not just the ruin of her job, but the ruin of a moment of pure, unadulterated kindness. And for the first time in a decade, he felt utterly and completely ashamed. The drive home was a tomb of silence. The air in the Rolls-Royce was so thick with tension, it felt hard to breathe. Cormac sat in the front, staring out at the blur of Houston's streets, while Peterson drove with his usual quiet focus. In the back, Noah was completely still. His face turned towards the window, away from his father. Cormac's mind replayed the scene at the restaurant over and over. The manager, Mr. Henderson, had been profusely apologetic. "Yes, sir, Mr. Bellwether. Right away, sir. Completely unacceptable." Rosalie had been led into the back office, her face pale. She hadn't looked at him again. He had won. He had asserted his control. He had eliminated the perceived threat. So why did he feel like he had just lost something essential? The shame he'd felt in the restaurant had now cooled into a hard, dense knot of guilt in his stomach. The waitress's words echoed in his head. "Your son was safer with me than he was with you." It was a brutal, clinical assessment, and it was undeniably true. He had been flustered, angry, and ineffective. He had made the situation about his own embarrassment. She had made it about Noah's needs. When they arrived at the mansion, the house staff moved with quiet efficiency to help Noah out of the car and inside. Cormac followed them to Noah's room, a large suite of interconnected rooms that included a physical therapy space and a bedroom with a ceiling lift system. A private nurse, a stern but competent woman named Diana, was waiting to take over. "How was the outing, Mr. Bellwether?" Diana asked, her professional gaze missing nothing. "Fine," Cormac clipped. As Diana began the routine of getting Noah settled, Cormac hesitated at the door. "Noah." The boy didn't turn. He was staring at the glowing star chart projected onto his ceiling. "Noah, what happened today?" "That waitress was unprofessional. She overstepped." Cormac's voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears. He was trying to justify an action that felt more indefensible with every passing second. Finally, Noah turned his head. His blue eyes, Catherine's eyes, were swimming with a hurt so deep it made Cormac physically recoil. The boy painstakingly maneuvered his gaze to his speech-generating tablet. It took him a full minute to type out his response. The silence was an accusation. The robotic voice filled the room, cold and clear. "She made me feel like a boy, not like a problem." The words struck Cormac with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. A boy, not a problem. In his obsession with safety, with control, with managing the problem of Noah's disability. Had he forgotten the boy inside? The boy who just wanted to get to the bathroom without a scene. The boy who could be delighted by pop rocks in a milkshake. That young woman, Rosalie, hadn't seen a collection of symptoms and liabilities. She'd seen a kid in a jam, and she'd helped him. Her simple, profound act of humanity had highlighted his own profound failure. He had seen the situation through the lens of a corporate lawyer. She had seen it through the lens of a caregiver. He backed out of the room, mumbling something about calls to make. He went to his study, a vast, mahogany-panelled room overlooking the manicured gardens. He usually found solace here, surrounded by the trappings of his success. But tonight, the room felt like a cage. He poured a glass of scotch, the amber liquid, doing nothing to soothe the fire in his gut. He thought of Rosalie's face, the tired eyes, the worn but clean uniform, the name tag, Rosalie Finch. He had destroyed her livelihood over an act of kindness. For a man who dealt in billions, the thought of the damage a lost waitressing job could do was abstract, yet the specific image of her face made it horribly concrete. What was her life like? Did she have family? Was she struggling? The thought that he had added to her struggles was unbearable. He had acted out of fear. The fear of Noah getting hurt, yes, but also the deeper, more selfish fear of being seen as an incompetent father. The fear of his own helplessness. Rosalie's competence had been a mirror to his own inadequacy, and he had shattered it. The night wore on. Cormac couldn't work. The numbers on his screen blurred into meaningless symbols. All he could see was Noah's accusing eyes. All he could hear was the synthesized voice, "She made me feel like a boy." By 2 a.m., the guilt had crystallized into a single undeniable conviction. He had made a terrible mistake. A mistake that went against the memory of his wife, Catherine, who had been the most compassionate person he had ever known. She would have been appalled. He picked up his phone and called his head of security, a man who could find anyone, anywhere. "Wake up, Donovan," Cormac said, his voice raspy. "I need you to find someone. Her name is Rosalie Finch. She was a waitress at the Gilded Spoon on Westheimer Road. I want to know everything. Where she lives, her financial situation, her family, everything. And I need it by morning." He hung up the phone. This wasn't about fixing a PR problem or assuaging a guilty conscience with a check. This was different. He had to undo the damage he had done. But more than that, he had to understand the person who in one brief encounter had shown him more about fatherhood than he had learned in 10 years. He needed to find Rosalie Finch, not just to fix his mistake, but because he had a terrifying, dawning suspicion that she held a key to fixing his life. The file arrived on Cormac's desk at 7:00 a.m., delivered by a tight-lipped Donovan. It was thin, but dense with the details of a life lived on the margins. Rosalie Finch, 23. The black-and-white photo showed a young woman with a determined set to her jaw, the same one he'd seen when she'd stood up to him. She lived in a rundown apartment complex in a less-than-savory part of Houston. She was, as she'd said, a third-year nursing student at the University of Houston, carrying a heavy load of student debt. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet the waitress gig at the Gilded Spoon, which she no longer had, and a weekend position as a home health aide for an elderly man in hospice care. But it was the family details that made Cormac pause. Her father was deceased. Her mother, Wanda Finch, lived in a small town 2 hours away and was battling stage 3 multiple myeloma. A significant portion of Rosalie's meager income was wired to her mother every month to help with medical bills that insurance didn't cover. She was 3 months behind on her own rent. The landlord, a notorious slumlord named Silas Croft, had already started eviction proceedings. The report painted a picture of a young woman under immense pressure, holding her world together with grit and sheer force of will. And he, Cormac Bellwether, had just kicked out the most critical support beam. The guilt returned sharper this time, laced with a grudging admiration. He picked up the phone. "Peterson, bring the car around." Not the Rolls. The Lexus. The address Donovan had provided led them to a crumbling 3-story apartment building with faded brick and rust-stained window AC units. The air hung thick with the smell of damp concrete and desperation. It was a world away from River Oaks. Cormac, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, felt as conspicuous as if he'd worn a crown. He found apartment 2B and knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open a few inches, held by a chain lock. Rosalie peered through the gap. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and she was wearing a faded university sweatshirt. When she saw him, her expression went from wary to hostile. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold. "Ms. Finch, Rosalie." "May I come in? I need to speak with you." "I think you said everything you needed to say yesterday," she shot back. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm in the middle of packing." "Please," Cormac said, and the word felt strange and foreign in his mouth. He wasn't used to pleading. 5 minutes, that's all I ask." He must have looked as desperate as he felt, because after a long, tense moment, she sighed and slid the chain off. The apartment was tiny, barely furnished with second-hand items. Cardboard boxes were stacked against one wall. It was clean, but the poverty was palpable. My son Cormac began standing awkwardly in the small living space. "Noah, he told me that you made him feel normal, like a boy, not a problem." Rosalie's hard expression softened slightly. She wrapped her arms around herself. "He's a great kid. Smart. He deserved better than his dad, having a meltdown in the middle of a restaurant." The jab was direct, and it landed. "You're right," Cormac admitted. "I was completely out of line. My behavior was inexcusable. I came here to apologize and to make amends." He pulled a checkbook from his jacket. "I spoke to your manager. You're not fired. But I imagine you don't want to go back there. I want to compensate you for the lost wages and for the distress I caused." He started to write his pen, hovering over the paper. "What amount would be fair?" 10,020. Rosalie stared at the checkbook and then back at him, a flash of anger in her eyes. "Do you really think you can just write a check and fix everything? You walk into my life, humiliate me, get me fired in front of all my co-workers, and now you want to buy your conscience a clean slate." "My life isn't one of your corporate acquisitions, Mr. Bellwether." He stopped writing, humbled. "No, you're right, I'm sorry. That was arrogant." He put the checkbook away. "But you are in trouble. I know about your rent, about your mother's medical bills." Her eyes widened in alarm. "You investigated me, I had to find you," he said simply. "Rosalie, I'm not here to buy you off. I'm here to make you an offer. A real one." He took a breath. "You said you're a nursing student. You're trained in patient care. The way you were with Noah, it was remarkable. He connects with you. My son is surrounded by a team of the best doctors and nurses money can buy, but he's desperately lonely. He needs a friend, a companion." She watched him, her expression guarded. "I want to hire you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not as a nurse, not yet. As a private companion for Noah. Your responsibilities would be to spend time with him, help him with his studies, take him on outings to places he actually wants to go. To be his friend." He laid out the terms, watching her face for any reaction. "The salary would be $200,000 a year. I would also pay off your existing student debt in full. and I would cover the complete cost of your mother's medical treatments, whatever they may be at any facility she chooses. Furthermore, I will pay for the remainder of your nursing school tuition and fees. You would live at the estate. We have a suite of rooms in a separate guest wing. You would have access to a car. Your only job would be Noah." Rosalie stared at him speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He had just offered her a solution to every single problem that was crushing her. It was a golden ladder out of the pit she was in. It was also, she knew, a deal with the devil. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why would you do all this? For a waitress you tried to destroy yesterday." Cormac looked away, his gaze falling on a framed photo on her bookshelf. It was of Rosalie with a younger boy who had the same bright eyes. The boy was in a wheelchair. "My late wife, Catherine, she believed the greatest poverty was a lack of human connection," Cormac said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have given my son everything money can buy, and I have failed him in the one way that matters. Yesterday, for a few minutes, you succeeded. You gave him a moment of dignity and joy. I can't put a price on that, but I can sure as hell try to keep the person who made it happen in his life." He looked back at her, his eyes pleading. "I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it for Noah." Rosalie looked around her tiny box-filled apartment. She thought of the eviction notice on her door. She thought of her mother, of the constant, wearying fear for her health. Cormac Bellwether was offering her a lifeline of unimaginable proportions, but it meant stepping into his world, a world of wealth and power she couldn't comprehend, to work for a man who was volatile and proud. It meant leaving her life behind and entering the gilded cage. She looked at the photo of her and her brother Michael. He'd passed away from muscular dystrophy when he was 15. She knew better than anyone the loneliness of a childhood defined by illness. She thought of Noah's brilliant, sad eyes. With a deep, shaky breath that felt like a leap into a new reality, she looked at the billionaire who had changed her life twice in 24 hours, once for the worse, and now perhaps for the better. "Okay," she said. "For Noah, I'll do it." Stepping into the Bellwether estate was like stepping onto another planet. Rosalie's entire apartment building could have fit into the mansion's foyer, a cavernous space with a sweeping marble staircase and a chandelier that looked like a frozen firework. The air smelled of lemon polish, old money, and a silence so profound it felt louder than the constant noise of her old neighborhood. Her life transformed overnight. The threadbare clothes were replaced by a wardrobe Cormac's personal shopper curated. The constant anxiety over bills was gone, replaced by the surreal reality of a salary that was more than her parents had ever made in a decade combined. Her mother Wanda had wept with relief on the phone when Rosalie told her the news: her treatments now scheduled at MD Anderson Cancer Center, the best in the country. But the true heart of her new reality was Noah. Their friendship blossomed with an easy, natural grace. Rosalie saw past the chair, past the physical limitations, and straight to the brilliant, funny, and sometimes sullen 10-year-old boy. They didn't just do his prescribed physical therapy. They turned it into a game, Galactic Ranger training. They didn't just study. They built a scale model of the solar system that took over an entire room, complete with blinking LED stars. She learned the nuances of his communication, the way a slight flicker of his eyes meant he was telling a joke, the way his jaw tensed when he was frustrated. She advocated for him, insisting to Cormac that Noah be given more agency in his own life. Soon Noah was choosing his own clothes, planning their weekly outings, and even learning to code a simple computer game with a specialized adaptive controller. For the first time since his mother died, Laughter echoed in the quiet halls of the East Wing. Cormac watched the transformation with a sense of detached wonder. He kept his distance, burying himself in his work, but he saw the changes in his son. Noah was more engaged, more confident. The dark circles under his eyes were fading. He initiated conversations with Cormac, telling him about the things he and Rosalie had done, his electronic voice buzzing with an excitement Cormac hadn't heard in years. A fragile sense of peace began to settle over the house. But every Eden has its serpent. In the Bellwether mansion, the serpent was Genevieve Davenport. Genevieve was Catherine's older sister. After Catherine's death, she had appointed herself the matriarchal guardian of the Bellwether legacy and more specifically of Noah. She was a tall, impeccably dressed woman with a spine of steel and a smile that never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. She was the co-trustee of Noah's massive trust fund and sat on the board of the family's charitable foundation. She visited the mansion 3 times a week, her visits conducted with the formality of a royal inspection. From the moment she met Rosalie, Genevieve's disapproval was a palpable force. So Genevieve had said, during their first encounter, her eyes raking over Rosalie from head to toe. "You're the companion." She said the word as if it were something distasteful. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Davenport," Rosalie had replied, offering a hand that Genevieve ignored. Cormac has always been impulsive. Genevieve continued circling Rosalie like a shark. To pluck a waitress out of obscurity and give her free run of this house seems particularly reckless even for him. "Tell me, Ms. Finch, what exactly are your qualifications? I'm a nursing student." "But mostly I'm Noah's friend," Rosalie said simply. "Friendship is not a qualification, dear. It is a sentiment. And sentiment has no place in the care of a boy with Noah's challenges." Genevieve's hostility was subtle but relentless. She would appear unannounced during Rosalie and Noah's activities, offering thinly veiled criticisms disguised as suggestions. "Are you sure that game is not too strenuous for him? Ms. Finch, we wouldn't want him to become overstimulated. Or I notice you're letting him eat pizza. His dietary plan is quite specific. Perhaps you haven't read the binder Diana prepared." She would question Rosalie in front of the other staff, undermining her authority. She would bring up Rosalie's background at the dinner table with Cormac. "I was just thinking, Cormac, have you had a full background check done? I mean, a thorough one. People from those sorts of neighborhoods can often have complications in their past." Rosalie did her best to ignore it, focusing all her energy on Noah, but she felt constantly on edge, like she was being watched and judged. Genevieve was planting seeds of doubt, not just in Cormac's mind, but in the minds of the entire household staff. Rosalie could feel their professional courtesy cooling, replaced by a wary suspicion. The conflict came to a head one afternoon. Rosalie had taken Noah into the estate's large, climate-controlled greenhouse to work on a small herb garden, something Noah could manage from his chair. They were laughing, their hands covered in soil, when Genevieve appeared at the door, her arms crossed. "This is hardly appropriate," she said, her voice sharp. "He could get an infection. The soil is full of bacteria. Diana would never permit this." "It's just potting soil," Rosalie said calmly, wiping her hands on a towel. "It's good for him to do normal things." "There is nothing normal about Noah's situation," Genevieve snapped. "And you seem to forget that at every turn. You are encouraging him to take risks, filling his head with fantasies, instead of preparing him for the reality of his life." Noah, who had been smiling now, looked crestfallen. He typed on his device, "I like the garden, Aunt Jen." "Of course you do, darling," Genevieve said, her voice dripping with condescension. "She's letting you do whatever you want. But it's not what's best for you." She turned her glare back to Rosalie. "You are an employee. You are here to follow a prescribed regimen, not to play in the dirt? You are not his mother." The final words were laced with venom. Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. It was a cruel, calculated blow. She looked at Noah, whose face was a mask of misery. "You're right," Rosalie said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "I'm not his mother. But I'm the one who's here with him every day. And I'm not going to let him live his life in a sterile bubble. Because you're afraid." Genevieve's eyes narrowed into slits. "Your contract has a probationary period, Ms. Finch, and I assure you I will be speaking to Cormac. He will see that he has made a grave error in judgment. Your time here is running out." She turned and swept out of the greenhouse, leaving a chill in the warm, humid air. Rosalie looked at Noah. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She knew then that Genevieve was not just a nuisance. She was a threat. She was a dragon guarding a treasure she didn't understand, and she would do anything to drive away the one person who had managed to get close. Genevieve was true to her word. Her campaign against Rosalie escalated from passive aggression to active sabotage. She began a quiet, methodical investigation of her own, convinced she would find the leverage needed to expel Rosalie from their lives. She believed with the unshakable conviction of the privileged that anyone from Rosalie's background must have a dirty secret. Her first move was to interview the staff, creating an atmosphere of paranoia. She'd ask leading questions. "Have you noticed Ms. Finch on the phone a lot? Does she seem secretive? Have you seen any of her old friends visiting the estate?" She implied that Rosalie was a spy, a gold digger casing the joint. Next, she went after Rosalie's past. She hired a private investigator, a former police detective, with a reputation for digging up dirt. The investigator, a man named Brody, started by revisiting Rosalie's old apartment building. He spoke to her former landlord, Silas Croft. Croft was a bitter, greedy man who was still angry he hadn't been able to evict Rosalie and raise the rent. For a few $100s from Brody, he was more than willing to paint a dark picture. "Oh yeah, that one," Croft sneered. "Always late with the rent. Had shady-looking guys coming and going. Real piece of work." The shady-looking guys were loan officers from the student loan company and a friend's brother who had helped her move a couch, but Croft made it sound sinister. Brody's report to Genevieve was a masterpiece of innuendo. It didn't contain any hard evidence of wrongdoing, but it cast a long shadow of doubt. Subject has a history of financial instability. Associates with individuals of questionable character. Source indicates potential illicit activities to cover debts. Genevieve now had her ammunition. She chose her moment perfectly. Cormac had been having a good week. A major deal in Dubai had closed successfully, and more importantly, Noah had received a glowing report from his physical therapist, who noted a marked improvement in his mood and motivation, attributing it directly to Rosalie's influence. For the first time, Cormac felt a sense of equilibrium, a belief that things might actually be okay. He was in his study one evening when Genevieve requested a private meeting. She entered with a grim, serious expression, carrying a leather-bound folder. "Cormac, we need to talk about the Rosalie Finch situation." She began, her tone grave. Cormac sighed. "Genevieve, if this is about the greenhouse, it's about much more than that," she interrupted, placing the folder on his desk. "I was concerned, so I took the liberty of having a professional look into her background. I think you'll find the results disturbing." Cormac reluctantly opened the folder. He read through Brody's report, his brow furrowing. The language was vague, full of weasel words like potential and indicates, but the cumulative effect was unsettling. Financial instability, questionable associates, the damning quote from the landlord, "This is gossip, Genevieve, innuendo." Is it? She countered, her voice sharp. Cormac, you brought a complete stranger into your home, into your son's life. You know nothing about her. This report suggests she is at best a deeply troubled young woman, and at worst a grifter looking for a payday. Think about it. She's in debt, her mother is sick. She's desperate. People do desperate things. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And there's more. Last week, one of Catherine's sapphire earrings went missing from the jewelry box in my old room here, the one I use when I stay over. Cormac felt a jolt of alarm. Did you report it? Not to the police? No, I didn't want to cause a scene. But the only people who have been in that room are the regular cleaning staff who have been with us for years, and her. She was in there with Noah, helping him find a book he'd left. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and poisonous. You're accusing her of theft? Cormac asked, his voice low. I'm presenting you with facts, Genevieve said smoothly. A desperate financial situation, a questionable past, and now a missing item of significant value. The conclusion is obvious. She is manipulating you, Cormac, and she is a danger to Noah. Cormac's mind was in turmoil. He thought of Rosalie's kindness, the genuine light in her eyes when she was with Noah. It seemed impossible that she could be a thief, a liar. But Genevieve was his sister-in-law, the sister of his beloved deceased wife. She had always been his rock, the one constant in the chaos after Catherine's death. Her words carried immense weight. The seeds of doubt Genevieve had planted began to sprout. Had he been naive? Had his guilt over the restaurant incident blinded him? Was this all an elaborate con? The world he came from was full of transactional relationships and hidden agendas. It was the world he understood. Rosalie's simple, selfless kindness had always felt like an anomaly, a beautiful but unbelievable exception to the rule. Maybe it was just that unbelievable. He looked at Genevieve, then at the report. He was torn between his instinct and what appeared to be logic. I will handle this, he said, his voice cold and distant, the familiar mask of the CEO slipping back into place. That night, the laughter from the East Wing sounded different to him. It sounded hollow, perhaps even calculated. When he saw Rosalie in the hallway, her warm smile now seemed to his newly suspicious eyes to be hiding something. The next day, he summoned her to his study. The room felt cold and imposing. Rosalie entered a little hesitant, clearly sensing the shift in his demeanor. Is everything all right, Mr. Bellwether? He didn't ask her to sit. He stood by the window, his back to her. An item has gone missing from the house, a valuable piece of jewelry. He heard her sharp intake of breath. What, it was taken from Miss Davenport's room? A room you were in recently? He turned to face her, his eyes hard. Do you know anything about it? Rosalie's face went from confusion to shock, and then to a deep, profound hurt. Her eyes welled with tears. You can't possibly think that I would steal from you, from this family. Your financial situation is difficult, Cormac stated, parroting Genevieve's words. You were desperate when I found you. And you think that makes me a thief? She asked, her voice trembling with outrage. After everything, after how I am with Noah, you would believe that of me. Her pain was so raw, so genuine, it momentarily pierced his armor of suspicion. But he had the report. He had the facts. I have a report from an investigator, he said, his voice flat. It details some concerns about your past. My past, she cried, now openly weeping. What, that I was poor, that I was fighting to keep my head above water and my mother alive. That's not a character flaw, Mr. Bellwether. It's called survival. She stood there devastated and betrayed, and Cormac felt a sickening wave of uncertainty. He had wanted to be methodical to confront her with the evidence and get a confession. But looking at her, he felt like he was the one on trial. I need you to pack your things, he said the words, tasting like ash. I'll have Peterson drive you wherever you need to go. Your severance package will be generous. Rosalie stared at him for a long moment, the tears streaming down her face. She didn't plead. She didn't argue further. The fight seemed to go out of her, replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking dignity. "It's not your money I cared about," she whispered. "It was your son." She turned and walked out of the study, leaving Cormac alone with the echo of his decision, a choice that felt profoundly and horribly wrong. The silence that descended upon the mansion after Rosalie's departure was not the peaceful quiet of before. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of misery. Noah refused to leave his room. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't engage with his nurses or his physical therapist. He simply sat in his chair, staring at the star chart on his ceiling, the light from the projected nebulas reflecting in his tear-filled eyes. When Cormac tried to talk to him, to explain, Noah would just turn his device off. The silence from his son was more damning than any accusation. The life and light Rosalie had brought into the house had been extinguished, and Cormac was the one who had snuffed it out. 2 days passed like this. On the third morning, Cormac found Diana, the head nurse, waiting for him outside his study. "Mr. Bellwether," she said, her expression grim, "I feel I must speak up. What has happened is a travesty. Diana, this is a private family matter. With all due respect, Sir Noah's well-being is my professional matter." She countered, her voice firm. "I have worked with children in Noah's condition for 20 years. I have never seen a caregiver connect with him the way Rosalie did. She had a gift, and I do not for 1 second believe she is a thief." She continued, "And as for Ms. Davenport's earring, you should know that she loses things constantly. Last Christmas, she accused a caterer of stealing her pearl necklace only to find it a week later in her coat pocket. She is careless and quick to blame others. To ruin a young woman's life based on her word is unconscionable." Diana's words were a crack in the dam of Cormac's certainty. He had trusted Genevieve implicitly, but had he ever stopped to question her motives? Her grief over Catherine had curdled over the years into something possessive and controlling, especially regarding Noah. Had her protection become a cage, the final blow came from Noah himself. Later that afternoon, Cormac entered his son's room to find him painstakingly typing on his tablet. The message he had crafted was long. Cormac waited as the synthesized voice filled the silent room. "You believe Aunt Jen. You don't believe Rosalie. You didn't even ask me." I was there, in the room. Rosalie never went near the jewelry box. She was helping me find my copy of A Brief History of Time. That's all. Aunt Jen is lying. She doesn't like Rosalie, because Rosalie makes me happy. And Aunt Jen thinks being happy is dangerous. She thinks I should only be safe. But Rosalie taught me that you can be happy and safe. You chose wrong, Dad. You always choose being safe over being happy. The indictment was absolute. You always choose being safe over being happy. It was the story of Cormac's life since Catherine's death. He had built a fortress of wealth and control to keep pain out, but he had also locked out all the joy. The truth crashed down on him with sickening force. Genevieve had manipulated him. She had preyed on his deepest fears and his sense of loyalty to his late wife's family. The missing earring, the investigator, the innuendo, it was all a calculated plot to remove a perceived rival. A cold, clear rage replaced his confusion. He walked out of Noah's room and went directly to the guest suite where Genevieve was staying. He found her on the phone, laughing. He held up a hand, and she ended the call, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "Where is it, Genevieve?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Where is what, Cormac?" "The earring. The one you used to ruin an innocent woman and break my son's heart. Where is it?" Her face paled. "I told you it was stolen." "Stop lying," he roared, his voice echoing in the ornate room. "It was never stolen. This was all a game to you, wasn't it? A way to get rid of someone you couldn't control." He took a step closer. "I trusted you. I honored Catherine's memory by keeping you at the center of this family. And you used that trust to poison me against the one person who has done more for my son than anyone. You used Noah's well-being as a weapon." Genevieve stammered, trying to defend herself, but Cormac cut her off. "You will find the earring. You will write a letter of apology to Rosalie, and then you will pack your bags. Your role as co-trustee of Noah's fund will be terminated. Your presence on the Foundation's board is no longer required. You are no longer welcome in this house." Tears of rage and self-pity streamed down her face. "You would choose a little gutter snipe over me. Your family, she showed more family to my son in 3 months than you have in 10 years, Cormac said, his voice raw. "Now get out of my sight." He left her there and went back to his study. He felt hollowed out, but also strangely liberated. He knew what he had to do. He picked up his phone. "Peterson," he said. "Find Rosalie Finch. I don't care what it takes. Bring her to me." "No, wait, don't bring her here. Find out where she is. We're going to her." Peterson found her 2 hours later, not at a new apartment, but at the bus station, with a one-way ticket to her mother's town. She had her severance check untouched in her bag. She had given up. When Cormac's Lexus pulled up, she flinched, thinking he had come to harass her further. But then the back door opened, and Noah was there in his wheelchair, Peterson having maneuvered him out. Cormac got out and walked toward her, his face stripped of all pride. "Rosalie," he said, his voice thick, "I have never been more wrong in my entire life. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I listened to lies because they confirmed my own fears. I betrayed your trust and I betrayed my son." He gestured to Noah. Noah looked at her, his eyes shining, and typed a single word on his device. "Stay." Tears streamed down Rosalie's face. There's nothing to forgive," Cormac said quickly. "It's for me to earn back your trust, if that's even possible. Genevieve is gone. The lies are gone. What I said before, about wanting you to be here for Noah, that was only half the truth. We need you, not just Noah. I need you. You showed me what was missing in this house. It wasn't a companion for my son. It was heart. It was you." He took a deep breath, making a choice that was bigger than any business deal he had ever made. It was a choice about the future of his family. "Please, Rosalie, come home." He didn't offer her a job this time. He offered her a place. He offered her a family. Rosalie looked from Cormac's desperate, pleading face to Noah's hopeful one. She looked at the bus ticket in her hand, a symbol of her retreat from a world that had almost broken her. And then she looked at the open door of the car, an invitation back to a world where she was not just needed, but cherished. Slowly a small, watery smile touched her lips. She tore the bus ticket in half and let the pieces flutter to the ground. In the end, it wasn't the billionaire's money that changed the waitress's life forever. It was his choice, his final, terrifying, and ultimately healing choice to trust compassion over cynicism, to choose a found family over a broken legacy, and to finally see the immeasurable value of a person not through the lens of a balance sheet, but through the eyes of his happy son. Rosalie didn't just get a new life. She gave one back to a father and son who had been lost in a gilded cage. Their story reminds us that the greatest transactions in life have nothing to do with money and everything to do with the courage to open our hearts. If this story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that explore the incredible power of human connection. What did you think of Cormac's final choice? Let us know in the comments below.